A warm welcome to everyone at Ultimate Meaning, the Theory of Samsara. Today it's my great pleasure to introduce to you all Beth Upton. Welcome, Beth.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And so Beth spent about 10 years as a fully ordained nun in the Therevadan tradition, much of that time studying under the Venerable Pa Auk Sayadaw in the Burmese tradition. And I don't really want to cover too much of her backstory because we've got a limited amount of time, but there's a few questions. And anyway, you can see some of the previous videos to understand her history. And so the first question I wanted to ask was, what are the main factors that caused you to decide to become a fully ordained nun?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. And I could answer it in a lot of different ways. The main factor was the good fortune to meet my teachers. And at that age, I ordained when I was 25. So for me, it was an age of making experiments with my life. I think the same for a lot of people in my generation, trying this, trying that, deciding what I want to do with my life. And in this phase of experimentation, I had the amazing good fortune to meet the Dharma and to meet my teachers. And out of everything I'd seen on the menu of life, this was by far the best option, by far the most beautiful, promising option. And so I followed it.
It's quite unusual for somebody of that age, I think, to discover spirituality. Many young people are quite anti-religion, I find. So how is it that you came to recognize the truth of this path?
Again, I think really the skill of my teachers, and not just my teachers. When I arrived at the monastery and through my time at the monastery, we only ever had group interview. It means that if you wanted instruction from the teacher, you had to ask in a group, in front of a group. So we got to hear the practice and the questions and answers of others. When I arrived and I listened to what some of the other meditators were doing, it blew my mind. I couldn't believe that people in the world were actually doing these things. And I got to that age and no one had even mentioned it was possible. So the strength of the teachers, the strength of the community, was so obviously embodying something of great value to me. I made the commitment to stay there until I had learned what they were teaching.
So you're primarily inspired by those that you met, but it often says in the text that in order to hold the vows, you have to first have this mind of renunciation, which is turning away from the pleasures of samsara. Was that a part of your way of thinking at that time?
Yeah, not consciously so. I wasn't... in my conscious thinking, I didn't have this word renunciation. But like I said, I was in a phase of experimentation in my late teens, my early 20s, going here, going there, trying this, trying that. And in these experiments, I learned what doesn't work already, right? So like I didn't want to study more, didn't want to go down the path of earning a lot of money. I'd learned, okay, doing lots of partying, that's not going to take you anywhere good. Going more countries, that's not going to take you anywhere good. Work in international development, already disenchanted to that. So many, many dead ends I'd managed to meet already. At that age, I wasn't seeing that as a good thing. It was making me feel somewhat hopeless about life. But in retrospect, it was my way towards renunciation. I was already learning, okay, you can't go this way, it won't end well. You can't go this way, it won't end well. And I'd had that experience already many times, such that when I met the Dharma, I noticed something different. This is a path that gets better and better and better.
I'm surprised you could recognize that at such a young age. Had you heard of or were you aware of the goal of liberation at that time?
So there was a period of time, about a year, maybe a bit more than a year, between when I first started meditating, and I was working in Sri Lanka, and Sri Lanka is a Buddhist country, up until when I ordained. And in that time, I started to educate myself somewhat about the Dharma, learn the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, and listen to Dharma talks and read books and ask around and meet other meditators. So at that time, liberation came to me as a concept. I don't think I believed it was something that people in this day and age really do until I met my teachers and met that community. And even then, when I met my teachers, when I met the community there at Pa Auk, I could see, oh wow, like this is what people really do, but it's not what I could ever do. It's not what I could ever do. And it was only through continued practice that it started to dawn on me, wait, maybe this is not only something that other people can do, maybe it's something I could also do. And now in my teaching work, this is one of the messages that I try to give. Liberation isn't just for other people from different cultures. It's also possible for normal folk from our culture.
And in the scriptures, it says that these results are only gained by mendicants, those who take fully ordained vows. Is that also the case in the Theravāda tradition?
No, so I think our traditions are the same in that they speak about 4 stages of enlightenment or 4 stages of awakening. And in our tradition, the first 3 are available to lay people and ordained people.
So stream enterer, once returner, non-returner.
Yes, yeah. But the final stage of enlightenment, full enlightenment, Arahantship, they say that this is only for ordained people, or if you are to attain Arahantship as a lay person, so if I were to wake up tomorrow, get lucky after breakfast and attain Arahantship, then you either have to ordain within 7 days, so you have to take monastic vows within 7 days, or you die. This is the myth of the Theravada tradition.
Yeah, okay. I wonder which choice many lay people in the West would take. They probably choose to die rather than be ordained. Did you feel like you had to become ordained in order to achieve these results or to get what you wanted out of the Dharma?
No.
Or were you just inspired by the entire community and the...
Yeah, no, I didn't. I felt no pressure to ordain. It was just the obvious choice at that time, and it brought joy to my heart. The Vinaya brought joy to my heart. The monastic form brought joy to my heart at that time. But now I teach a predominantly lay community, and I see, obviously not all of my lay students are practicing the extremely advanced things, but some of them are, to the same depth that I saw in the monastic community at Pa Auk.
Oh, in the monastic setting. Oh, interesting. And do you feel like you met people who achieved the state of an Arahat?
No.
Within your teachers, for instance, Pa Auk?
No, I don't.
Okay. Did he claim to be an Arahat or a stream enterer or anything like that?
Typically, monastics don't talk openly about their attainments.
Yes.
I've seen Pa Auk Sayadaw teach other people to the level of stream enterer and Sakadagami. But I have not seen him teach anybody to the level of Arahantship.
What are the signs or what are the conditions for achieving stream enterer as it's taught in your tradition?
The direct experience of Nibbana. So this means absorption in the experience of Nibbana, which is free from any concept, but also free from any trace of materiality and mentality.
And so if it was such an inspiring time, then why did you eventually choose to disrobe?
Yeah, I get asked that question a lot. And there were lots of different reasons at that time. I'd been ordained for 10 years. And in the tradition that I trained at Pa Auk, you could think of it like a meditation university. They've got a curriculum of meditation techniques that we train in that is very detailed, it's very rigorous, very systematic. You kind of go through it step by step. It's very extensive. I very seldom hear of a meditation technique that isn't in one way or another covered in this training. And when I ordained, I presumed that it would take me my entire life and more to complete all of these meditation techniques. But after 10 years, I had practiced my way through them. And so I could have stayed in that tradition, going over those same techniques again and again and again. And it's very possible that through repetition, I would have got a different result, or I would have deepened in a different way. But there was no new practice for me to do. So that was part of it. I felt like I had completed a chapter there. At the same time, I didn't see the new, better monastery to ordain into. I looked around and the other monasteries that I saw offered less, not the next step.
Were you living in the West at this time? Or you were a monastic living in the West this time?
I was still in Myanmar. Or I was going back and forth, but I had a good awareness of the different monastic traditions available, and I didn't see one that offered me more. At the same time, I noticed that although my meditation was deep, it was also fragile. And by this I mean that if there was a disturbance, if I had to have a difficult conversation, deal with a difficult person, leave the monastery for a day, my meditation would really shake. Because in monastic life I hadn't had to integrate a lot of challenge. And I wanted to make my Dharma practice more resilient to the challenges of life. And I knew that to do that, I need to leave the monastery. This was another big reason. At the same time, I was starting to teach and pick up responsibility, and I felt well placed to teach in my own culture. There's already plenty of teachers in Myanmar. And I knew that if I tried to teach in a way that mimicked my Burmese teachers, I would be inauthentic and lonely and unhappy doing that. At the same time, if I were to teach in a way that was relaxed and authentic to me, I risked in subtle ways disrespecting the tradition in which I trained. Not in any major way, but just in the way that I sit, in the way that I use my humor or narrate things. It's not sort of by the book enough. And so I felt it better to leave that tradition rather than have this friction between trying to be a representative of that tradition and culturally not quite fitting the mold, so that I could relax and teach in a way that feels authentic to me. And I think I'm very, very loyal to the way that I was taught in the way that I teach. But yeah, culturally more authentic to my Western roots. On a deeper level, though, I wasn't aware of this at the time, consciously, but now I understand. On a deeper level, our path to Arahantship is one of disenchantment with all of existence. And it's very real. It's very real. You don't get to carry the sights and the sounds and your favourite song and your favourite person into parinibbana. It's disenchantment to all of existence. And refined meditation techniques can go a long way towards aiding that disenchantment. But some disenchantment we arrive at through living. So I gave you this example that when I ordained, I'd already tried this, I learned it didn't work. I'd already tried this, I'd learned it didn't work. I'd already tried this, I'd learned it didn't work. And that lived experience of disenchanting to something through learning it doesn't work fueled me into 10 years of monastic life and a long way into my path. But after 10 years, there were things that I hadn't lived and hadn't tried that I wasn't yet disenchanted to. I didn't know what it was like to hold power. I didn't know what it was like to be happy and open-hearted out in the world. I didn't know what it was like to be a teacher. These experiences I hadn't yet disenchanted to. And on a technical level, I understood they're all impermanent suffering non-self. But on a lived, embodied level in my bones, I hadn't yet learned that it didn't work. Now I've learned.
So you're still learning to be disenchanted with samsara, is that what you're saying?
Now I've got it. Now I'm in another cycle. So I've been out of the monastery now for 7 years and busy, right? I do emails and video calls and flights and airports and logistics and deal with people and lead retreats and all of these things. Now I know this is not the way. This is not the way to make an end to all suffering. I knew it in a way. through my meditation practice before, but I didn't know it in my bones, and now I do. Now I'm on my way through another cycle of disenchantment and renunciation. We'll see where it takes me in my practice, and there might be another cycle still. But I realise now, when I disrobed, there was a curiosity in me. What's possible in life now? What's possible? This isn't disenchantment, and there was something that I needed to live through.
And so we've had very similar experiences, really. And one of these is coming to the decision to try to establish a community or a hermitage in the West. So I've heard about your project. There's not a lot of information I can find, but as far as I understand, you're in southern Spain, Granada, trying to establish a community there. And what are some of the things that led you to make that decision and put your energies into this project? Was it disenchantment with doing international retreats that took you to the next step?
Kind of. I made that decision actually before I was disenchanted, because I knew the way that I trained, really, it's not what you can do in 10 days. It's not what you do in 1 month. This is what you dedicate years to, or what you dedicate your life to. And therefore it needs a place. Therefore it needs a place. So from very early on, I understood we need a place. I didn't understand how difficult it would be, but I understood, we need a place. So for a long stretch, we were using this free space in Almeria, southern Spain, which is some caves that I was squatting, and we turned this into
squatting. Cool.
We turned this into like a freestyle meditation community, and had a really good run there. Had a really good few years. But because we didn't, and we could never own that space, eventually it just wasn't viable anymore. So then we had to grow up and buy a space. Now we have bought land in Granada nearby, and we are in this slow process of getting the various permissions to start constructing. Spanish bureaucracy is slow. But really that's just me seeing the necessity to create supportive conditions for the practice. And in the meantime, I'm traveling around leading long retreats. And because I have this commitment to do all of my work by donation, by dana, we go to spaces that are willing to facilitate us in that way.
Yeah, this is a really main consideration, really, when it comes to the Dharma, is how not to sell the Dharma. Yeah. And it seems in the West these days that it's become a very commercialized thing.
Yeah, I agree.
Do you feel like you're finding solutions to this problem? For example, if you need to support practitioners in retreat, well, they're not working and they need to eat and they need clothing. And in the past, in the East, then we had systems of monasteries, and the 3 branches of the monasteries. One of them is to raise funds from donors. So how are you finding this part of your journey?
I do all of my work by donation. And I'm very grateful that the students that I teach have offered me enough that it allows me to do this work full time, and I can cover my needs. As for the students, because the way that I'm teaching at the moment is predominantly in the form of long retreats, my students will tend to come to 1 or more of those retreats in a year, and a lot of the rest of the year they're attending to their financial needs and their other needs. And I give them ongoing support throughout the year online. So a big part of the way that I'm teaching is this journey that I've had to make inside myself, which is to integrate a fairly deep meditation practice alongside working and living in the world. When I started teaching, people told me this wouldn't be possible. This wouldn't be possible. People can't practice jhana, deep samadhi, whilst also working a job. I thought, let's see if I can do it. Let's see if other people can do it. And what I found is that they can. They can. It's not as easy, it's not ideal, but they can. And so this is what we're doing at the moment. And then some of the students who have good supporting conditions or very strongly inclined towards renunciation, we have a few spaces around the world that can hold small groups on an ongoing basis, and I give them instruction. So we have at the moment a group practicing.
Are these permanent retreatants? Is that what you mean?
Yeah, permanent or long term. Yeah, so for example, there's a monastery in Austin which is willing to host some of my students long term, year round. and I give them instruction. We've got some practicing in Sri Lanka at the moment whilst I give them instruction.
And this is the purpose of your hermitage in Granada? To eventually provide full-time or permanent spaces for retreats?
Exactly.
A few?
Yeah, exactly.
Do you find that many people will want to do that permanent or long-term?
More than we can accommodate, yeah.
Oh. And when you say you host these long retreats abroad, what do you mean by long? How long are those retreats?
Typically a month.
So a 3-month retreat? A month?
No,
Okay.
typically a month, yeah.
Yeah. And also within your project, there's this kind of environmental angle that I think you've been approaching. This is something it's like a leftover from your past life in this lifetime, isn't it?
I think it's also in the Dharma. It's just maybe not emphasized in the tradition that I trained. But if we look at the Vinaya and the life of the Buddha, there are many Vinaya rules where we care deeply for our natural surroundings, no? And our culture is so far out of balance this way. We've learned to relate to our surroundings with so much defilements baked in. One of the benefits of staying somewhere for a long time is that the place mirrors back to you your defilements, right? If you are messy and you're staying in the same place for a long time, it doesn't take long before you see it, right? But likewise, if you're greedy, if you're insensitive, if you're impatient and you stay in one place for a long time, it doesn't take long before you start to see it. So for me, this feels like an inevitable part of our Dharma practice is notice. How do we impact each other as people in community, but also how do we impact where we are living? How do we impact this space? What's happening? What's it teaching us?
I frequently claim in my videos that the Buddha was the first environmentalist.
Yeah.
So we're up with that idea. You know, can't even cut down trees or cut the grass to protect the environment. So it's a really important point. So I'll move on a little bit because I know you don't have much time. But there's generally assumed that there's a kind of schism between the position of the Tibetan scholars and those in the Theravādan tradition. For example, you hear of these claims within the Mahayana Buddhism that the Hinayana foundation vehicle only works towards personal liberation and not the benefit of other beings, and that's the primary motivation in the Mahayana. And likewise, then there are claims, I've heard anyway, from Theravāda scholars, that Tibetan Buddhism is a corruption of Buddhism, and it's actually a reflection of Hindu beliefs. And furthermore, that some of our most renowned scholars, for example, Nagarjuna, was an emanation of the Mara. So is this something that you've encountered in your time? I know you spent a short amount of time studying Tibetan Buddhism at some point. I heard that in your biography. So is this something you've encountered from that side of the fence?
I don't like this kind of divisiveness. With the world as it is, if people are doing kusala, this is the word we use in our tradition, I don't know if you have this, but if we are doing wholesome deeds by body, speech and mind, we better not criticize, right? Because most of the people are not doing that. So if we are being loving, kind, generous, mindful, peaceful, we better not criticize each other. At least well done, do more, right? And most of these debates about how far can the tradition take you, if we are being humble, it's not relevant to us yet. We are the ones who just need to go as far as we can go in whatever vehicle we're on, right? Until we
just have to become good human beings first, right?
Until we
never mind arahats.
Yeah, until we hit the limit of the tradition, and then maybe these questions become relevant to us. In our tradition, it's true that we are focused more on our personal liberation, though we understand that by purifying our own mind, we can't not be of benefit to other beings, right? Because we are not really separate. So if I am full of love and generosity and gratitude and selflessness, what do I expect is going to happen to the beings I encounter? Of course, it will be a beneficial impact. And we also have this understanding that the liberation of all beings is a lovely idea, but something that even the Buddha didn't do. You know? So a great sort of North Star ideal, but to hold it as that, as an ideal, rather than a goal that we can practically execute.
And on the other side of that discussion, for example, the opinions of Theravādan scholars of Tibetan Buddhism. I mean, this is also common within Western philosophers as well, who see Tibetan Buddhism to be not authentic Buddhism, for example. Is this something you've encountered?
I hear so much people, all kinds of opinions, and talking bad about other traditions, other teachers within the Theravada tradition, within this kind of, we could go on and on and on forever. I'm sure people say all kinds of...
Personally, it saddens me greatly to see this kind of division. I have great respect for all practitioners who are sincere in their pursuit. And especially in Tibetan Buddhism, it's really bad. The sectarianism is very strong, and it's a really a black mark against our tradition, I think. I
do think there is the right time. Now I'm in a teaching role. I do think there is the right time to say to a student, the container that you're in, or the vehicle that you're in, or the teacher that you're training under, you've reached the limit of what they can do for you. And if we see this clearly, I think this is good and correct to say, because not all teachers, not all traditions are teaching to the same depth. And so if we can see, okay, you are now in a container that is holding you back, it's too small for you, I think we can say this. And I also think if we see people who are teaching something that is clearly not Dharma, we have a responsibility to call it out. But this one-upmanship of whose tradition is better on details that we're not even nowhere near practicing at that level, we're just getting high off of philosophy. For me, this is a waste of time,
Yeah, absolutely. And the people who do that tend to have very little experience themselves. Because what should happen as you gain in learning and experience is that you'll have increasing veneration for these teachers of whatever tradition they're in. Yeah. And there's something we call rime in Tibetan, which is this non-sectarian practice. And really, that's, I think, is the foundation of all Buddhism, because really we're to go beyond identification, right? And this prejudice is a very, very strong form of that. So I really want to get to talking about meditation a little bit. And first, I'd like to get your presentation on the difference between these two different types of meditation called Shamatha and vipassanā. I think this is a really important topic and one that many viewers will be interested in.
You just want me to go for it?
Well, I want you to present it from the way you understand it, because in Tibetan Buddhism we have different classification of vipassana. And so in general, most people seem to be, in our analysis, what they're practicing is the forms of shamatha. And so if you can kind of lay it out, so I can understand from your perspective what the differences are between, fundamental differences are between displacement meditation and insight meditation, as you understand it.
So we've got a bit of a vocabulary problem here, because the word vipassana now gets used for everything, right? And the English translation is insight, and everything is called insight meditation or vipassana meditation. For me, this word has gone the same way as like yoga or art, where, everything. Everything could be, you could take a nap and someone somewhere will call it a type of yoga or a type of art, right? You could be brushing your teeth, someone will call it a type of yoga or a type of art. And this is how I feel a little bit about vipassana. Like, you could be doing a lot of things and someone somewhere will have found a way to call it an insight practice. Some people are calling a body scan a vipassana practice. Some people are calling mindfulness of breathing a vipassana practice. Noticing what your thoughts are doing can be called a vipassana practice. So I feel like it's fighting a losing battle to try and reclaim that word. We've sort of lost that word to vagueness, right, already. And I don't think that's going to change. But in advanced meditation, vipassana means something very specific. It's almost like we need a new word for it now. Let's call it advanced vipassana. Given
we
that
have a term in Tibetan, it's called laktong, it means superior insight, and that's distinct from what we call vipassana.
So we've lost this word vipassana, but really...
But you were talking about in previous interview about specific practices. One was identifying the namarupa, so the division between mentation and material events, and then the effects of karma and result. And the way somebody you know, his name's Pa Auk Sayadaw, some French-Canadian monk I interviewed previously, he said it's more about meditating on processes rather than on meditating on focal objects. So I was just kind of wondering what that practice looks like from your perspective in terms of your training.
Right, yeah. So what I was getting to was this word vipassana now could mean anything.
Mm-hmm.
And we kind of need to concede the use of that word.
Mm-hmm.
But the word vipassana used to have a very specific meaning. And the starting point of a true vipassana practice is very high. The starting point of a true vipassana practice is when we are no longer with concept, when we are with the building blocks of reality, what we call ultimate reality.
Mm-hmm.
Concept doesn't mean we imagined it up out of nowhere. Concept means we made an object by compacting things.
Mm-hmm.
By
we take an
making
agglomeration of things and identify it as being something.
Exactly. So the apple is a concept, the table is a concept. We can have abstract concepts like unity and justice and integrity, but these things are all concepts. The starting point of vipassana is beyond concept, and it's where we break down all of these concepts into their constituent parts. And their constituent parts are what we call ultimate reality. And all of ultimate reality is momentary. Ultimate reality is made up of two parts. One is the material part, and one is the mental part and the mind. And both are momentary. On the material side, we've got particles of materiality coming into and out of existence. On the side of the mind, we have moments arising and passing away one after the other. And the ability to be with this ultimate reality, to be with this everything momentary, nothing lasts for more than a moment. That's the starting point of vipassana. That's the beginning. Everything up until that point is a samatha practice because we're still with compacted conceptual objects. We're still with things like the pain in the knee, a concept. My thought arising and passing away, a concept. The sound that I just heard, a concept. We're still with compacted, coarse, clunky objects. Our attention isn't yet refined enough to be able to observe reality on a fine enough level to practice true vipassana. And so our samatha practice is a process of going from more coarse conceptual objects through to more refined, increasingly refined conceptual objects that we can stay with for a long time. We're essentially refining our awareness. We're getting our awareness ready enough to be able to hold these exquisitely subtle objects that we discern in vipassana. When we start a vipassana practice, like I said, the first stage is just getting to know these momentary building blocks.
The ability to remain present in authentic reality, is that the starting point?
Yeah, exactly. That's the starting point. Without adding anything, without compacting it, allowing it all to arise and pass away. And then the next stage, which I think is what Bhante Jagara mentioned, is seeing how these moments are causally related to each other. Right? They're causally related to each other. We call this paccaya pariddaha gnana. It means discerning the causes and conditions. And then we go into how all of these momentary phenomena are impermanent, suffering, and non-self.
So would you say that these arupayatanas, arupajanas, do they fall into the category of shamatha or vipassana?
Samatha. These are conceptual objects. Very, very subtle conceptual objects, but conceptual nonetheless.
Yeah, no, it's good to hear that because I'm just translating a Tibetan text on this topic. And that's kind of the presentation in Tibetan language. It's very interesting to see the connections. In the past, then, there was always this feeling that, for example, the Sri Lankan monks invited a bunch of Tibetan geshis and khenpos, and they had this kind of idea that they got involved in all kinds of weird tantric rituals and they probably didn't learn much. And then when the Tibetan geshis came down to Sri Lanka for this conference, they were just totally amazed at how learned they were, because all of these things exist in the Tibetan, but I think we kind of, because of the language difference, sometimes we assume they're they're kind of different things altogether, but they're based on the same thing, like the Abhidharma, the Vinaya, etc., the sutras. So this concept of ultimate reality is central to Tibetan Buddhism, and you've given us a very kind of clear idea of where that starts. That's being able to identify direct perception. That's what we call in investigation, this direct perception of apprehending an object. You mentioned something in your previous interview, which was this idea of reflexive awareness. So can you just explain a little bit about what that is, especially in terms of what we call the ultimate reality?
I'm not sure I know what you mean by reflexive awareness. What did I say?
I think it was something you said in a previous interview. You were looking at ultimate reality and then also looking at awareness itself. And I was surprised to hear that, because that's often a position that's given in the Yogacarya tradition, when they talk about the self-awareness aspect. And so it sparked my interest. I was wondering what that meant to you in your own tradition.
Yeah, so we can think of the mind as made up of very many moments arising and passing away, one after the other. Only ever one moment at a time, no gap in between, very, very quickly. So the present moment is always the one that's doing the knowing. It's knowing an object, and it can't know itself. So whenever we know the mind, or whenever we are knowing these mind moments, or knowing a thought, or observing the workings of our mind, we're always knowing the recent past mind, because the present mind moment is the one doing the knowing. When we are practicing deep vipassana, we are seeing all of these mind moments as arising and passing away very, very quickly, one after the other. Again, what we're really discerning is the very, very recent past moments arising and passing away one after the other. But as we do that, sometimes there's a delusion building up in the background that there's some permanent thing here which is watching all of these perishing mind moments. There's some me watching all these perishing mind moments. So what we do is we discern these perishing mind moments, and then we turn the attention on what is knowing those perishing mind moments, and we see, oh, it's just more perishing moments. And what's the one that watched those? Oh, it's just more perishing moments. And what watched those? Just more perishing moments. And this is one vipassana technique that we practice.
It's amazing how similar it is to Tibetan Buddhism and Zen Buddhism. We think they're so different, but really it's very much the same, because it's not asserting that there is such a thing as reflexive awareness. That's why I was quite surprised. But you did say one thing, and you said is to know a perished moment, a previously past moment. So the question would be, is it possible to know a past moment?
Yes, it's possible.
Yeah,
and
so
it's
in
not
what
very
way what way is that knowledge manifest? Because is that memory of something that arose in a previous moment, or is that seeing the previous moment?
No, it's not arising predominantly through memory in the same way that you'd remember what you had for breakfast. When we go into remembering what we had for breakfast, we're working through the linking of perception, right? So you are recalling something that's a bit like this, and then you bring up the perception of whatever was the meal, your toast or whatever. When we discern past mind moments, we're relying much less on that perception function and much more on wisdom, which is our ability for wisdom to discern. Okay, there was a moment here, so there was a moment before. Right? So this is direct discernment.
Direct discernment. Yeah. Well, unfortunately, we're running out of time, and this is a really interesting topic. I hope at some point in the future you might have a bit more time so we could talk a little bit more about the nitty-gritty of meditation.
Yeah, I'd love to.
So maybe we'll schedule something for the new year. I know you've got a really busy schedule, but what I wanted to end on was one bit of main advice that you would give to Western practitioners in the 21st century.
Keep wise friends.
And so how do you find wise friends?
Yeah, that's hard. That's hard. But when you find them, keep them. When you find them, keep them. Yeah.
I was speaking to a guy from Nepal recently, and this is his major problem, is finding an authentic teacher or a spiritual friend. And it's an issue for most Westerners. Often when they travel to the East, then they're not taken seriously, especially if they don't speak the language. And so how do you think they might go about, for example, finding an authentic teacher or finding a wise friend in order to start developing a practice?
I was very lucky that I met extremely advanced teachers early on. But I think if you were starting from a place of no wise friendship, you need to take anything that's better than what you've already got, right? Right? Take anything that's wiser than what you've already got. Do your best there, and then keep on asking, keep on searching. But yeah, take anything that's better than what you've already got. If we're taking a step in the right direction, then we're on our way.
Yeah, I think this is often what people miss on the path. They don't realize that it's graduated and it's incremental.
Yeah.
And so many Westerners I meet, the first thing they do is like, okay, I need a meditation. And then it's usually like the highest level of meditation. So it's like we want to start at the very top floor, of the practice. And because of that, it becomes difficult to apply ourselves. And so what has kept you going all of these years?
It hasn't felt too difficult to keep going all of these years yet. It hasn't felt too difficult to keep going. I love the truth. I'm surrounded by wise friends, good people. I've had the fortune to be in a healthy body for most of my life and well supported in my material needs. I think I'm incredibly fortunate. It hasn't been difficult to keep going yet.
So you have the karma for the Dharma.
Thank goodness. Yeah.
Okay, well, I know you have to go. So thank you very much for sharing your wisdom with us. And we hope to meet you again sometime soon in the new year. Let's arrange another conversation, because there's a lot of points I want to get into here. For example, the formless realm meditations, etc. There's some differences between the Theravada and the Tibetan presentation, but I also think there's a lot of common ground. So I'd like to pick your brain on that. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, it was my pleasure.
Sharing everything you have experienced
me.
with us. And look forward to seeing you next time.
All right. Bye for now.